You know, there's a guy standing over here to my left. Very interesting cat. He was a former educator, former high school and college basketball coach, and he was unwillingly dragged into this whole fight. He is the founder, the host, the producer, everything for the Common Sense Show, which is one of the biggest alternative news programs available today. Incredible, incredible man. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Dave Hodges.
Thanks. Wow, I wasn't counting on this screen. Okay. When you coach, you learn to improvise, right? Or as they say in boxing, the strategy starts when you get hit in the mouth. I'm Dave Hodges. I'm privileged and pleased to be here with all of you. And I just want to say a word about what just happened with the Colonel. I'm facing a serious health challenge, and when he was speaking, I felt something visible and something in my heart, and I shared that with him after. And I'm looking for solutions, and maybe I found it. I suspect I did. So I want to thank the Colonel for what he did. And I'd like to start with just a short prayer that'll set the tone for where we're going. Dear Lord, I pray that we all are inspired here, whether it be from my words or from people's own personal motivations. But I pray that you raise up an army of followers and that I can be the example of how you can come from a background that did not predict I would ever be doing what I'm doing and doing it for you. And I predict that this is going to happen here. People that have hidden inner talents can reach people, will become missionaries of your word. We are defeated as a nation. That'll become clear as I go through this presentation, Lord, and I know you know that. But individual salvation is possible, and God can work a miracle if enough people can be convinced to get on bended knee and pray for the Lord's forgiveness and his guidance. And we need to become those missionaries here to go forth to win souls for Christ and pray that in our immediate lives we start to see a supernatural difference. Because if this were an athletic contest, Lord, you know I'd be saying, Lord, we're getting our butts kicked. And we're asking for your help, guidance to lead us out of this terrible place that we're at. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Well, let's go ahead and go to the first slide, if we could. We're doing this. They didn't trust me with a clicker. They shouldn't. I didn't trust myself. Anyway, I've entitled this, The Chinese Colonization of America. And as I deeply immersed myself into the Arizona/Maricopa County audit for the stolen election of 2020, I learned how hopelessly corrupt my local and state government are. There are good people. Senator Wendy Rogers is one. I think Judy Burgess serving in the House, I don't think I know. But it's harder to find a person who's not tainted by the Chinese/George Soros, who's a Chinese agent in this instance. But it's hard to find an honest person. We're all corrupted at every level, in every county. And we're going to hopefully teach you today by my own example and what I have learned. And you'll learn to go back to your communities and expose the wickedness, the corruption, the deceit, and the treason. And people that are in positions of public power that turn their back on the true findings of the election audit, which I'll share with you, are guilty of treason after the fact. Because everything, and I'll close with this, but I just want to set the tone, everything that has happened to this country under this dictatorship we're living under stemmed from having the election stolen. And we'll get into the scenario starting with the virus later. And before we jump into my presentation, I felt that God told me that I should tell you something that was not on my script. And it's about the virus. And more importantly, the deceit that we have been given, that we think we test, we think the numbers are real, and the media induces paranoia and fear. On April 18th, in the year of the virus, as I call it, Commissioner Hahn of the FDA came out and said, you know, we're not going to make these testing companies third-party validate. Well, hold on a second. My background, real quickly. What do I do educationally? I've taught history, I've taught sociology, I've taught them in high school, I've taught psychology, post-secondary, post-grad. But what enables me to comment on this is I've written 2 statistics courses and 1 research course in my academic career. And I know the process really well. This is in my wheelhouse. When you don't have third-party validation, you do not have a test. You have someone's word. Can you imagine Pfizer says, we're not sure this works. Don't tell anybody, because you tell anybody the $10 million you spent, that test gets thrown out the window, and then you've got to face the board, your stockholders. That's why they weren't made to validate. And there's not one test, nor has there been, to catch COVID. The government even corrected itself. I don't know if you remember, about a month ago, the FDA came out and said, well, we're no longer counting that PCR test because it catches too many viruses. Do you remember that? They admitted to what I was claiming for over a year. I've interviewed Tom Renz, the attorney for the frontline doctors, a couple times. And it's the position of the frontline doctors that the Delta variant, soon to be the Epsilon variant, mark that down, that's coming, they're covers for vaccine injury. And Tom, in his legal discovery of emergency rooms across the country, has discovered what the Israelis have published. But you can't say this in social media. But this is an Israeli study. 85% of the people in Israel that go to the hospital for COVID, supposedly COVID, they have been vaccinated. 80% here in this country, according to Tom Renz. And it was his position on my show that the Delta variant is a cover for vaccine injury. And this is what I felt I was commanded to share with you before I go into my presentation. I can't say that that's true. I can't sit down and clinically show you through independent studies that's true, but the next step would say that's true. We know there's never been a valid test. We know they lied about the numbers. They paid for phony diagnoses. They paid for phony death certificates. It was a big racket to inflate the numbers in order to subjugate this country. And we know that. And I'm telling you now, I think Tom Renz and the frontline doctors are right. So that's what I felt compelled to share with you. Anyway, let's very quickly, if I'm not familiar to you, we have a website that's .com. We have a TV show that's .tv. And we're on YouTube for as long as till they come and get me. And we do a lot of introductory stuff on YouTube, people who are just getting their feet wet in all this. And so we kind of lighten the burden on our TV shows where we do the heavy lifting. I bring the guests on who are really good at what they do, and we let it fly. No censorship, no commercials. And that's where we do our heavy lifting. So if you're said, okay, Dave, how do we follow you? If you're interested in doing that, we're done, that's how. Okay, let's go to the next. How I came to do this. My hope here is that those of you that aren't exerting the ability to influence people in your realm will walk away from here divinely inspired to do exactly that. And I kind of hold myself up as an example. When we go out in public, my wife still can't believe when people come up and start talking to me about the show, where we're used to anonymity for years. The only claim to fame is in a small universe called sports, and the number of students I had cross my classroom. I was unwilling to do this. I started broadcasting because John McCain tried to steal our property. We live out north of Phoenix, and they said, "You're too close to Luke Air Force Base." It's 25, 30 miles away, air miles. They have to fly over 250,000 people to get to us. I knew that was never it. And then they were doing this in different parts of the state and the same dynamics. And one night I ran the odds on my SPSS statistics package. And the odds of this all being a coincidence in 4 areas of our state was 65 million to 1. And I said, there's something else here. And I found it one night when I was looking at our county's map of future projects. And they had the Canamex from the Central American Free Trade Agreement, co-sponsored by Ted Kennedy and John McCain. And they had a number of years to get us off our property. So they took away our rights. You couldn't get a permit to do anything. And they were hoping over time slow burn would kill the community. Even though we had a letter from a previous base commander saying, "You're fine." When I stepped onto that ledge, I found out what media abuse was all about, particularly from a newspaper like the Arizona Republic. I started writing articles. People started publishing them. I was surprised. And I started appearing as a guest on various radio shows. And the late Pete Peterson from Wickenburg, which is about an hour north of Phoenix, said, "Have you ever thought about doing your own show?" And that's where it started. I didn't want to do it, but I did it part-time. But my news director at the time, Annie DeRiso, said, "Dave, you're called to do this as your life's mission. Stop coaching college basketball." Well, that combined with my son kind of entering into playing sports, and I wanted to be a part of all that, I got to leave college basketball on my own terms, and that's when I started this. And things have kind of taken off. Now, with my background, I talk to people that I went to high school with, that I played sports with. They're kind of shocked that I'm doing this. At first, the reaction was, "Have you lost your mind?" And it was, I think you have to a little bit. You have to certainly step outside who you are. And but I will tell you that I now know I have a purpose, and this is my purpose. And I believe every one of you here will have the same purpose. It certainly won't necessarily follow the same path I've taken, but it's the one that we all need to take. Because if we don't win the multitude of this country, the majority to Christ, and we don't get on bended knee, we're going to go through some really difficult times. I don't know that we have to be in the end times, but it looks like we are. But if we're divinely inspired and God changes his judgment on this nation for doing things like killing 60 million babies, I think we have a shot. But it starts here in this auditorium with all of you. The seed has to grow here and go forth. And there are some of you that are already doing that. The rest of you go, I just can't talk to people like that. No. And people are going to shun you. They will shut you out. And you just have to treat it like it's a busy signal and keep calling back. So I hope that that's what happens here. I've talked about my academic background, and I just wanted to read to you a couple of, if we go to the next slide, a couple of verses here that really came to me serendipitously. Tell me this doesn't describe the time that we live in. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked breathe rule, the people mourn. Proverbs 29:2. Are you mourning? Are you mourning for your lost country? Did you watch the border images from the helicopter on Fox News today, and you look at the fact that we have the Rio Grande area, that we do not have a border? And then you have to ask yourself the question, besides all the criminality that we know is coming in, how many people that are desperate, and I'm not judging them, but how many third world country people can we take in that are largely illiterate, poor, will need your tax money to support them. How many people can we take in like that from the third world until we're the next third world country? And that's what we are. We're turning into a third world country. Also, I want to read you one more voice. Treason can sometimes be rewarded. Not at the end of the day, not at the end of the journey, not when we meet our Maker, but it can be rewarded in the short term. Judges 1:24-25. The spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, "Please show us the entrance to the city, and we will treat you kindly." So he showed them the entrance to the city. They struck the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man and all his family go. See, that was written for Joe Biden, Susan Rice, Barack Obama, General Milley, and I don't even like to use the word general. He is not worthy of that title. This is written for these people. And in my home state, we're going to go through the roster here in just a second, and this treason is being rewarded in the short term. In the long term, it will not be, but it's going to take a supernatural intervention from the Lord to turn it back. It's that ominous. You know, we talk about the dangers of stage 4 cancer. America has stage 10 cancer. And this is what I discovered. I'm going to walk you through that process. Because what I tell you about my home county, I live in the northern part of Maricopa County, but what I tell you about my county and my state, it's true in your state. And I know because I talk to audit people from other states, and I hear the same stories. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. So these are the benefiters. I just want to point one thing out here. Mitch McConnell, Elaine Chow. Is anybody aware of this at all, what I'm going to say? You can anticipate my next words. Anybody know? Okay, a few of you. The Senate Majority Leader until the election fraud, his wife, Elaine Chow, appointed to be the head of the Secretary of Transportation. Care to guess what her parents do? Biggest ship in China connected to the CCP, and they control a lot of interest in the Chinese ports. Her parents are employees of the Chinese government. I want to know who did the vetting. Who was that FBI agent that day? Probably the same people that showed up on January 6th and are persecuting people who didn't even go into the Capitol. Incredible. This is incredible. She's appointed by Trump, and we got to admit, Trump didn't do a good job with his appointees. He took too many people's word for things, Fauci, among others. How she passed vetting is incredible. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk about some of these connections here, and I'll come back to these people and talk about their role in a stolen election, and better yet, more of a concealment of a stolen election to help people get away with it. Governor Doug Ducey. Wow. He had a business that's called Stone Cold Creamery. And he had franchised it, but it wasn't successful. He had franchisees bailing out on him. He had major business problems, and he got into China. And there he became a multimillionaire. That's not a crime, but it sets the stage for where we're going. Doug Ducey, at a speech given at the National Governors Association with the Chinese Chamber of Commerce there, he said, "We're so looking forward to Arizona's relationship with China. We have rare earth minerals that are in great need by the Chinese military." That's pretty close to a quote that was published in the World Tribune, and you can get an English translation from South China, which is a CCP document. He cast his lot right there. But that's not all. He also is a member of one of the boards at TGen, vaccine related. They make big money. I screamed up and down. I don't care if you do anything wrong or not, Ducey. It's one or the other. You're the governor or you're in TGen, because one stroke of your governor's pen moves tens of millions of dollars. You can't afford, when you're a public official, to have even the appearance of impropriety. And it's written all over him. and his actions show it. So we'll come back to Ducey when we talk about how he helped ferment the stealing of an election. Oh, believe me, anybody here from Georgia? I know the colonel is. Their people are worse than our people in Arizona. So I'm going to emphasize, this is not just Arizona. I'm just using this as the illustration. Secretary of State Katie Hobbs. I published a video on my website where Secretary Hobbs said, when I'm elected, 2018, the Secretary of State, I'll use my office to get other Democrats elected and will maintain those positions. It's on video. What's that say about her fiduciary responsibility to the citizens of Arizona to have free and fair elections? She's predetermined by her statement, and her actions carried it out. She also is funded in her campaign by George Soros. That's not in dispute. Then you go to Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. Let me ask you a question. If you have potential evidence of a crime and the court orders you to surrender the evidence, do you have to do it? Or can you say, no, we believe the election was fair, we're not obeying this order? Well, the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors didn't do this once, they did it twice. And now they're getting away with it even more. They refuse. Their supervisor chairman, Jack Sellers, Gateway Pundit, published a picture of him on CCP TV. He is one of the creators and directors of the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, where virtually every major corporation, all 4 state universities, the community colleges, the utility companies, 2 major utility companies, they are all in allegiance with forming Chinese sister cities. Ordinarily I'd say, hey, great. Except it's a nation that repeatedly threatens to nuke us. And right now they're sailing to our waters to violate our territorial waters, trying to provoke something. That's not a secret. They're off the coast of the Aleutian Islands right now. And here we have our supervisor, Jack Sellers, who refuses to obey court orders and appears to be, on the surface, Chinese best friend in Maricopa County. And then we have the sheriff of Maricopa County. If we found criminal intent and wrongdoing, we'd have a hard time finding people to arrest. Do you see Biden sending in the feds? Of course not. They would send in the feds to block arrests. The sheriff of Maricopa County was recruited to defeat Joe Arpaio. I don't know if you're familiar with Joe. He gets a lot of bad press. But those of you who know him know he wouldn't go along with this fraud for 1 second. Penzone was paid $2 million by George Soros front organizations. And I've had people on my show like Sheriff Mack that have verified this. He's one of them. And we'll talk about his role in the election theft as well. And then finally, Karen Fann, the Arizona State Senate president who pretends to be on our side. Pretend is the operative word. She said very early on, I didn't catch it right away, but she said, we're not going to overturn the election, no matter what we find. And I've written to her, Karen, come on my show because I'm going to ask you one question. If you break into my house and steal my jewelry and you get caught and you're convicted, do you get to keep the jewelry? Because that's what she's saying. She also has conflicting business interests that I believe make her vulnerable. She makes money off her brother's construction company, Fan Construction. They do the state signs, the medians. And I've asked for explanations. How do you get to vote on something that you'll derive a profit from? But another Arizona state senator who coached a talk show host in, I think it was Lake Havasu, said, don't let Dave ask that question. I did anyway. We've given her permission. Who gives a publicly elected official permission to vote on their own profits? Oh, we know what happens, but it's illegal, and this isn't even hard to find. I found this on her public disclosure statement on the internet when she ran for office. And then I've gone into her hometown of Chino Valley, which is in Yavapai County, and I hear a whole lot worse that I won't go into here. And she's running the audit. And I'll get into her role a little bit more. Let's go to the next slide, please. How have these traitors harmed us? And we go federal all the way down to local. The virus. Does anybody here believe it came from bat soup? Gain-of-function research. How is Fauci not under indictment? How? I call him Dr. Mengele Fauci. He helped to morph a virus that has killed 12 million of our fellow human beings on this planet. And he sits there and lies to Congress. The emails show he's lying, and no one's touching him. But I'll tell you why. He's a Democratic Party operative, and he's an operative de facto-wise of the Chinese government. Do you think China wanted Donald Trump reelected? No, he turned around the trade imbalance. He put China in their place militarily. He slowed down their colonization of places like in South Africa, South America. They wanted him out. Gain of function. Let's use the Wuhan flu and let loose. And what did the Wuhan flu lead to? Changes in election laws that allowed ballots to come from here, there, and everywhere. I know people who aren't even Democrat. In Arizona, they got up to 20 ballots. And we're not doing anything about it. The audit is going to claim they found things, but we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. But they won't take corrective action, and they won't tell you the big story. And I'm going to tell you the big story because I guarantee you, I don't care what state you're in, including this one, same thing happened here. Fake science. I covered that. I went into more detail in the opening than I thought I would, but we don't have a test. We have phony numbers. It's all for profit. And we're ignoring things like herd immunity. We're ignoring things like individual immunity. And we all know from viruses, when you catch it, what happens? And the viral load, I've been told by doctors, when you've had it versus getting vaccinated, it's 21 times higher. But they won't even count that. And then there are people who take the vaccination, the first one, and they get terribly sick, and their doctor says, if you take the second one, you'll die. And they're not giving those people exemptions. They will kill people to vaccinate everybody. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but this is how I see it. No ivermectin. No ivermectin. No hydroxychloroquine, despite Trump's endorsement. They've made it illegal. In some states, they will send a doctor to jail for prescribing it. It's all vaccine, only the vaccine and only the vaccine. And it's not my position to come in here and say, it's magnetized, it can track you, it will give you this or that, or attack you where you're weakest in 3 to 5 years. I've heard all that. I'm not an expert enough in this to tell this story. I've interviewed people that are, and the vaccine is bad news, in my opinion. It's up to you to do more research. I'm not qualified to go down that road. I think you'll agree with me. We no longer have a constitution. We permitted a pandemic exception to the Constitution of the United States. And you know who one of the big victims was? We should all be outraged by this. The church. Right? Pastor MacArthur on the beach. Social distance. Mass outside. Mass. While he preaches. You're going to jail. We're fining you X amount. He goes to court and he wins. What did Newsom do? I don't ever hear of that ruling. and he persecutes them again. We have courts saying, you can't stop religious liberty. And these governors are ignoring the courts. They're making up their own rules as they go along. We are no longer a nation of rule of law. We are a nation where we're ruled by people that the law is what they say it is at the time that they say it. You have no liberties. Biden came out, and I'll quote, those amendments, your amendments, keyword, your amendments, not him as an American, our amendments, your amendments are not absolute. How many of you heard him say that? Good. Who gets to decide? Who gets to decide what's absolute? Biden? So he shows up after over 200 years of being a constitutional republic, and I'll tell you what your rights are. Let me explain to you legally what's happened to us. When the Founding Fathers created the republic, they said, nation created by God. Your rights are granted by God. They are inviolate. And there were colonies like Rhode Island that weren't going to go along with this until there was a Bill of Rights. So Thomas Jefferson was tasked with the mission of creating those 10 amendments. They're absolute. Absolutely absolute. But only in a constitutional republic where you can't violate rights. We're the only nation that's ever been a constitutional republic. That's part of what people mean when they say we're the great experiment. What we are now is we have communitarian law. And I don't know if you've ever heard the difference before, but communitarian law says that, oh yes, you people in Europe, you have freedom of speech. You can own guns under certain conditions. You have right to due process under certain conditions. But if it's not in the greater good, or the common good, or what I like to say, the communist good, then we'll tell you what your rights are. That's communitarian law. And the civilized nations of the world, except for us, have communitarian law. Biden, when he said, your rights are not absolute, he said, I don't recognize God's authority here. That's one. Number two, I'm taking over this government now, and we are now a communitarian state, which really is a vanilla version of dictatorship. Okay, our Constitution is gone. We have a wrecked economy. Who pays people not to work when they're able-bodied and there's jobs? But you know why? It's the war on small business. Are you familiar with the story of Rollerball, the movie from 1975? I'm old enough to remember it. Rollerball was about a world that had become governed by 6 corporations. 6. And in the movie, they preached individual achievement, glorification, and rights. We shun on that. We shun that to every degree that we believe in. And they had a star in the movie. His name was Jonathan E., and he was the Michael Jordan of this mythical rollerball game. And they said, you have to retire because you're too big. You're too popular. You're more popular than the state. You got to go. And we saw the lack of rights that people had. What happened when we shunned small business, and we'll go back to the lockdowns. The lockdowns favored the box stores. They made record profits. You could be a small business and produce the same products, but you're now declared non-essential and must close. And then when we finally reopen, we pay people not to work more than they can make with minimum wage. And so now again, we're attacking the small business. We're establishing a corporate oligarchy in this country. And this is part of the mechanism of control. And see, this comes kind of into my undergrad days when one of my degrees was in sociology. I learned about this stuff. I was in college when rollerball came out, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm hearing about this in my social stratification class in sociology. Today we're living it. Corporate rule, and I'll give you verification from another angle. Have you ever heard of the Trans-Pacific Partnership? It was really a disguised free trade agreement. But they had a 22-person panel that was given the authority to overrule all the signatory Congress, executive branch, and judicial branch. They could veto everything. One of the first things people did, and this is where I reject the notion Trump is one of them. Trump didn't act appropriately the last year. He got taken in by Fauci and others. But when he came into office, he did away with the attempt to place us under a corporate dictatorship directly. He killed the TPP. And you probably haven't heard of this very much because you think the mainstream media that works for these corporations are ever going to tell you? Of course not. We're getting medical shortages now. In Arizona, the biggest employer is Banner Health. And unfortunately, I get service from them, and I'm worried. If you're not fully vaccinated by November 1st, you're out. I know from talking to doctors and nurses at Banner, over 60% of them are not vaccinated. And the needle's not moving very much. So they're saying, that's it. What's going to happen to our health care? This is happening everywhere. It's happening in Yavapai County north of me. It's beginning to happen. They're starting to do legislation in Mojave County, which borders California and Nevada. It's going everywhere, folks. Health care is purposely being shorted. This is why they're singling out the health care providers. They want you vulnerable. And then the military. Do you want to join the military and work for the woke General Milley? The man who leaves Americans behind? The first general in American history that's ever done this. And then commits treason against his commander-in-chief. And he also was guilty of coup d'etat. Let me explain. General Milley told his subordinates, we know now, to not listen to Trump. That's a coup d'etat by definition. In the old days, we would have taken him out, tried him, and hung him. That's the penalty for treason. The fate of the Rosenbergs for selling nuclear secrets to the Soviets. That should be the fate of General Milley. He cost 13 American lives. And there's a whole lot of other things that enter in that I'm not going to go into right now, but those 13 people did not have to die. We knew it was coming. We had the ability to prevent it. Milley knew it. Biden knew it. The whole management team knew it, and they didn't stop it. Ask yourself this: who puts the Taliban in charge of your security? What moron would do that? Continuing. Isolation camps coming. Watch Australia. Watch New Zealand. It will come here. The legislation, EFS, number 8 through 14, provides for medical martial law in this country. You can look that up on my website. I've detailed it many, many times. And this is how I think they're going to deal with the final group of resistors. Pretty interesting. Okay, this is stuff that stemmed from election fraud. So if you think I'm going down sideways, I am, but everything started with election fraud. This stuff doesn't happen unless we let the election get stolen and the election to stand. Next slide, please. So there's a summary of what I've told you. Contrived virus led to election changes, all that followed that we just detailed. How was the election stolen? Well, we're going to get into that now. And I'm finding the same pattern in Wisconsin, Atlanta, here. How many familiar with Paul Preston? Agenda 21 Radio. He's the head of the New California movement. He could become your governor in this county, so you got to be nice to him. But Paul has a lawsuit right now that could overturn the California election. And it's cut and dried. They used the wrong kind of paper ballot. They had the wrong printing. They had the wrong verbiage. That invalidates every single vote. And the court case is to be decided on September 24th, they have avoided summary judgment. It's many of us, our belief, because the Arizona audit is due on the 24th, and people like Wendy Rogers are not going to let this get buried. She's a state senator. Some people think we're headed for a major false flag between now and then. I can't say for sure, but the rumblings are there. Let's talk about election codes and Dominion. In May, I jumped in to this issue really heavy because I knew that bad things were coming out of the election. And so I started to be approached by election officials, and finally I talked to 3. And they told me, Dave, we didn't have the election codes for the Dominion machines on the night of the election. I said, I thought that was state law. It is. We were never given the codes. I said, how can that be? And the codes don't tell you a lot, except if Dominion was communicating with China, you'd be able to see it. When they would do some kind of internal adjustment, like flip a 52-48 to 48 to 52, you would know when the event transpired, but they wouldn't be able to tell you the amount. But the Maricopa County Board will not surrender the election codes. Now, I'm going to side with them on this. I've learned they never had the codes. And I ran this story on May the 12th, and on May the 13th, people inside the audit, not all, started contacting my colleagues like Paul Preston, like Sarah Westall. Don't listen to Dave Hodges. He's a terrible man. He's going to wreck the audit. Oh, wait a minute. One person. I didn't sign an NDA. I don't work for the government. How could I ruin anything? I could just be a crackpot that doesn't know what he's talking about. But I hit a home run on that statement. 3 days later, and I don't know if my statements led to this, but the proximity in time is interesting. 3 days later, the Board of Supervisors had a press conference, and they had the sheriff there. And in the press conference, they said, we can't release the election codes for security reasons, but what we did do was we gave them to Sheriff Paul Penzone, George Soros funded. Oh, wait a minute, Penzone's at the meeting, the press conference, and he says, yes, I got the codes. Where in the election hierarchy is the sheriff? He's not. But even if Penzone was given the codes, which he wasn't, but even if he was, isn't he constitutionally mandated to give up what's already been court-ordered to surrender? Right? He should be out of office right now for failure to live up to his constitutional mandate. So that's why I'm saying George Soros funded. I had Chris Kitsy, and he was the founder of Before It's News, and he has a really interesting background and knows high people in high places. One of the pioneers in crypto, working with governments. And he contacted me in January. This is before I knew how the election was stolen, other than the ballots they brought in after the fact, and how they got 20 votes per person. And he said, Dave, what would you say if I told you that the Dominion vote for your state and many other states took place in China? He came on my show, an on-screen documentation, this is on the TV show, and he showed on screen how it happened. Now, I didn't have the context to really run with it then. I know how credible Chris is. I believed him, but I couldn't take this to the next level until I learned about the election codes. These votes weren't even counted in Maricopa County. They probably were not counted in most of your counties. They were counted in China. All right, let's talk about duplicate ballots. This is a big problem that a lot of you will face when you look into what happened to your election. You go to stick in your ballot to a machine, and the machine rejects it. And it says, error, and they give you a duplicate. By state law, every state, including Arizona, you have to attach the original ballot. Now, from those 3 election officials, we did some counting. I said, how many of your ballots do you have? Now, the precincts are only supposed to be 1,000 people, but Arizona's grown beyond way beyond that. And these 3 election officials, we added up their numbers. 20,000 ballots, no original, everyone for Joe Biden. And they were counted. Biden won by 10,000 votes. You don't have to go beyond that. It's not like we have to prove they did wrong. The fact that they don't have an original attached to the duplicate means you throw out the ballot, Trump wins. That's simple. And yet, people in the audit team, like Karen Fan, the head of the audit, won't look at it. And there's problems in the audit. Ken Bennett, who's the former Secretary of State of Arizona, he signed an NDA. He violated the NDA. He got caught. He got fired. They wouldn't let him on the floor of the audit. Why would the number 2 guy leak audit information if it was going according to the way it should go? And then another audit official, Liz Harris, spoke at a Tea Party meeting in late July I attended, and she said, we're doing a second subpoena of the Board of Supervisors, but the state Senate President, Karen Fan, will only put 4 things on there to subpoena, and we need about 20. And she said, call Karen Fan and pressure her. See, this is internal division with the audit. They have found 176,000 missing votes. But they haven't analyzed who did they mostly go for. I think we know what's going to happen there. So let's go to the next slide, please. This is the best story of all. Are you familiar with the routers, how they work? Right? They track machines, correct? I can't tell this story and keep a straight face half the time. The routers are not being surrendered to the auditors because of what it would show, obviously. But here's the reason they give. There's old police business on these routers. Identities will be compromised. So you're telling me in a county of 4.5 million people that you took secondhand routers and used them for the election. Who could even believe a story like this? Yet, people inside the audit aren't touching this. Yet, this is public record. It's not like a source told me. These 3 election officials will always remain anonymous until they tell me otherwise. But this is public record. Okay. There is another event that took place, and it's resurfaced again. In southeast Maricopa County, heavy Trump, probably 70-80%. A lot of them were given ballpoint pens to vote, and then they came out and took away the ballpoint pens and gave them Sharpies, and they bled through so they could get duplicate ballots. And this is still an issue. There's actually a lawsuit that's going to be launched on this, I'm hearing next week, by some of the citizens of that county. Now, what made a lot of the fraud possible? There was a breach in the voter rolls for Maricopa County prior to the election. So you could look and see Jane Doe hasn't voted for 10 years. Let's use Jane Doe and stick her on the ballot. That's what those duplicate ballots were. And even Sonny Borrelli, a state senator who won't go all the way in this, but even he acknowledged on YouTube, this is how they got people that lived at the corner of walk and don't walk in another state on an Arizona ballot. He's right. And this is how they pulled off the duplicate ballot fraud. How the other fraud, now listen to this. When did we find out as a public about this fraud? Did we find out about it in September? No. Did we find out about it in October? No. We found out about it when the new county clerk and recorder wrote a letter in late January to the public and said, this happened, but don't worry, no bad information was given out. He had to disclose. In case the audit was successful, the county clerk and recorder, Mark Reischer, did not want to go down in flames. But they didn't even tell the people that the voter registration was compromised and this could affect absentee ballots. Didn't even deal with it. Chain of custody. Maricopa County is famous for this. ballots taken by individuals from any given party, put in the backseat of a car and driven for counting. That's been going on for 40 years. There's been lawsuits over this, and they never make any headway. And you're saying, why don't the politicians do something? If you're getting elected from a corrupt system, why would you change it? That's really you're going to find this in your state too. Your politicians won't touch it unless they're usually first term, because if they're multiple term politicians, they're benefiting from a corrupt system. But the chain of custody for the ballots, the county supervisors will not surrender them to the audit team. I mean, can you believe this is happening in America? 2 court orders. Now they're before the Attorney General, and the Attorney General, who's not really on our side, but even he ruled you got to give up the evidence. You have 30 days. They should have had 3. And now they got another 30 days. And they're hoping the public interest will wane, because our Attorney General has higher aspirations in government, and he doesn't want to rock the boat of the ship that's helping him sail. Let's go to the next. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about these people and how they stole the election after the fact. They're the after-the-fact traitors. If you participated in voter theft with what's happened in this country today, you are a traitor after the fact. That's my position. Ducey, we all know about his communist Chinese connections. And can I mention to you before we go further, as we talk about communist China, can we talk about this? Satan's ally. I mean, let's realize what we are. Either you're on the side of Jesus or you're on the side of Satan. And when you serve a godless nation that incarcerates people for the wrong kind of meditation, like the Falun Gong, and you kill them by taking their organs with no anesthetic, that's Satan. The communist Chinese government is Satan through and through. They say they don't worship a divine entity. No, but they live it. Ducey, with his communist Chinese connections, was not loyal to his fellow Republican Donald Trump. What he did is the state Senate asked to come in December and hold a hearing. Oh no, he wouldn't let him. And he wouldn't let him come back until January the 13th, 1 week after the certification vote. The fix is in. This is Doug Ducey. Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, we've already talked about her participation, announcing she's going to help Democrats. She's funded by George Soros. She brought Soros representatives on the floor of the audit until they got caught in the first week and then got banned. So she had no intention of carrying out the rule of law. We talked about Sellers. We talked about Bill Gates. This is really tragic for me to talk about Gates because I used to know him really well. I don't mean casually. I knew him really well. He's married to a Democratic judge. Early on in the election process, the election audit process, his wife, a judge, Democratic judge, made a ruling. And she said the Republican judge overseeing the audit must go. And she appointed an extreme left-wing judge to oversee. So even if the audit comes out with anything actionable, this judge will block it. You will not have governor support. The DOJ will not come in and look for the fact that our rights, have been compromised. Do you realize all of us in America have been disenfranchised? And we've been disenfranchised so we can implement Chinese social credit system, or should I say, satanic Chinese social credit system, that you have no rights. You can't protest. You will be silent. This is China, and China is a synonym for Satan. Let's just call it what it is. But Bill Gates' wife played a paramount role, and he's part of the cover-up, and it's really a tragedy for me personally, because I used to say he was one of the smartest and most noble people I knew. But what do they say about power? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Paul Penzone, we've talked about him, and Karen Fan is sabotaging the process from A to Z while pretending to be on our side. Okay, next slide, please. There are state senators in Arizona, like in your state, that know what's wrong. Some of them, like Sonny Borelli, a state senator from Mojave County, he said, we're decertifying, but at a recent public gathering in his county, he said to the people, we're not decertifying. We're only looking, this is a civil matter now. Stealing an election, the things I've described that are provable, are criminal. But someone, I think, in my opinion, got to him. He's representative of a lot of other people that have turned their tail and raised the white flag. People who once wanted to give me information. People who said, when the time is right, I'll come on your show, and now they won't give me the time of day. Here's the bottom line. It's going to take a miracle from God to save our country, because all of your states are compromised in this fashion to various degrees. All 50 states will be compromised. Look it up there. H.R. 1 and SB 1. That gives unconstitutional control of elections to the ruling party. The federal government will usurp the constitutionally given power for elections to be controlled locally and in the state. And when that happens, you are now living under a dictatorship. And you'll learn the meaning of the quote when Joseph Stalin said, we don't care who votes, we only care who counts the votes. So we're in a bad position now. Let me ask you this, what's happened to religious liberty? Do you know the Democratic Party took God out of their party platform? Do you know that on the day of the National Day of Prayer that Joe Biden got up and went on about defunding the police and not one word about Jesus or God? And this is what he was supposed to be speaking about. These people are godless. I mean, I often call Congress, no better than prostitutes walking the street, because the corporation with the biggest donation is going to get what they want at our expense. But it's deeper than that, people. This isn't just a takeover of changing from a republic to a communist state. It's the establishment of a godless state. And this is where we're heading. And you will, one day, in your Christian faith, if we don't turn this around, be persecuted, be hunted. That is going to happen to a lot of us. And I don't do this lightly, but I look at it this way. I'm protected as long as God wants me to do this work. And when he said, you've said enough, then I get to go home. I don't have any illusions about what I've taken on. And the colonel talked earlier about churches being compromised. 3 words: clergy response team. Need I say more? Research it. And if your pastor, if you go to a church, is a member of it, they have an NDA not to reveal it. And they're there to spy on people like me and probably people like you. The treason continued in Afghanistan. Chinese are going to get the biggest supply of lithium in the world. Lithium underlies our weapon systems, our economy, and thanks to Biden, he left Americans behind. Biden has imported at least 200,000 terrorists. I have it on good information, and Tucker Carlson told this story to a point, but could not tell the rest. But I know that the commercial airlines that were commandeered to take out Afghans landed them in Middle Eastern airports, and they took on people, all male, 20s, 30s. They came to America, and as Tucker Carlson reported, and I quoted, they didn't go through customs, they didn't go through security. We don't know who these people are and where they went. Well, I can tell you who they are. They're terrorists. And they're here to carry out the continued attack upon this nation. And this is not an isolated fact, folks. This is something I'm telling you now. When I broke the story, I was on a limb, but it's now pretty well accepted by people that do this work. Milley, I've talked a lot about him. But the fact that you have a president that says you can violate the chain of command to your predecessor, You can commit a coup d'etat, you can endanger American lives, and you can cost American lives. And the Biden administration's fine with that. We're not represented any longer. I have called for a political jihad, pardon the expression. And what I mean by that is this, that we need to unelect 99% of all the people that are in public office. And we need to make sure the ones we're voting for, and you must do this in the primary process, in the primary election, for reasons I won't get into now, but it has to be in the primary. And you have to do a means test. If they're not a Christian, they don't get elected. This is how desperate it is. I know we're a government of tolerance, but I don't see another religion coming to our aid, do you? Only the power of God and a miracle, or miracles, is going to change this. Let's go to the next slide, please. I thought I had one more. Oh, it's at the bottom, and I got to read this because it's so faint, and they didn't print it. So let me see if I can squeeze here. Okay, let's go back to that last slide, please. And I'll get up real close. Deliver me from those who would do inequity and save me from men of bloodshed, Psalm 59:2. This is what we face. Don't pick up a gun. Yes, you should have to guard your yard. That may be necessary. I hope it's not. But don't pick up a gun. We're not going to change anything. I've often said, oh, I used to be an athlete, but now, what do they say? I'm too fat to fight and too old to run. You can even reverse that, and that's still true. But our weapons are the armor of God. But we need to become missionaries of the truth, people. And one thing I've learned is this, and I'll say this in closing. You can talk to people till you're blue in the face, and you can dot all the I's and cross all the T's, and they don't hear you. You have to look at where people have an interest that you can link into. And I've said this, there are many ways to get into the information of the house of the New World Order controlled by Satan. You can come into the window, the chimney, the basement, the garage. You can come in a number of ways. But you have to find what appeals to those people, and then you have to talk to them on that level. Well, this is how this administration's hurting you. By the way, do you know Jesus? Some won't. This is your opportunity. And I pray that going forth from here, we've become an army that's not just going to change our communities, but will change the nation and change the world. I thank you for listening to me.